Everything seems to be slow for me. All right, so now we're recording. That's good. All right, so we are on page 144, 145. We're continuing into Buddhism now. As we're moving further away from the Western religions, and further east, the religions just get a little bit more unusual, okay? So Buddhism is a big religion. Why are we studying it? Why are we looking at it? Because we have 488 million Buddhists that are living worldwide, okay? So that is definitely a very, very sizable population. And that is, again, this worldview is going to affect the lives of this many people, and it's going to affect the way they see the world, and it's going to affect the way they communicate. Therefore, it's prudent for us to not miss on that. Okay, so Buddhism is something that's become more popular, I think, for a lot of Westerners, especially in the later years, in these past few generations, because I think the Western world is moved into reason and logic and things like that. And so Buddhism is a very interesting system. It's non-theistic, okay? Buddhism does not purport a belief in a deity at all. Some people would say, it does not even make it a religion. I guess in some ways, maybe in some ways, maybe not. But that's what you have to realize. It's a non-theistic system. It's a worldview that does not have a god or a deity. So as a result, it's appealing to some people because it's so different from what they know in their world of gods and goddesses and religions that do have a deity. Okay? It works for scientists because it doesn't have God, you know, it has no commandments. So it certainly is less restricting. So Westerners find it appealing. So if you understand religion and you understand God in a very Western sense, Buddhism is a weird one because it doesn't have any of those things. What you expect a religion would have, essentially, okay? There's no prayer, there's no sacrifice, there's no special commandments to do, nothing that you would do that would get you, you know, to some spiritual place, you know, in the way that the Western religions typically do, okay? So that's what makes it a little bit different, all right? Now, let me get to the founder. You know, the founder of Buddhism is actually, Buddhism comes from Hinduism. That's important to understand. Buddhism comes from Hinduism. It emerges out of something else. It's not founded on a foundation of nothing, okay? We have a story of a Indian prince, okay, Siddhartha Gautama, who becomes the first Buddha. Buddha is a title. It's a description of a person. He becomes the enlightened one, okay? And essentially, he is the one who begins this new movement. But as an Indian prince, the story goes, he's born into a life of luxury and wealth. He's been coddled. He's been taken care of in every way possible. And then later in life, he encounters a crisis because he encounters things like death and suffering, which he has never seen before. He was shielded from that. And all of a sudden, now he realizes how bad life is and how privileged he was that he didn't really know the truth. He was shielded from the truth. So that sets him on a journey of search. And he starts to meditate and seek the meaning of life and what it's all about. And as in the process of this journey, in the process of trying to discover the truth, he has this moment of enlightenment, okay? And he becomes the Buddha, the enlightened one, okay? So Prince Siddhartha becomes Buddha in a flash of a moment, in an instant understanding of a truth. Things become clear to him. So from this time on, he begins to teach what he has understood. He begins to teach the path that he himself has gone to become the enlightened one. So he starts teaching enlightenment to other people. Okay. So Buddhism is really all about enlightenment and understanding what reality really is, and versus not understanding what reality is. So remember, Buddha is just a teacher. He's not a man. Buddhism does not have divinity to it. He's not a prophet. He is just a human being who has seen truth, and his job is to teach that truth to others. He attained that truth, and his aspiration is to share with others how that truth can be attained, essentially. That's what Buddhism, in a nutshell is. That's the history of it. So he simply shares those things with people. The way that Buddha described himself is that he said, "I am awake." Okay. Are you God? No. Are you a holy man? No. What are you? He says, "I am awake." Basically, I woke up and I realized the reality, and I am in this position to explain it to other people. So that's what the whole idea of Buddhism is. Now, there are different varieties of Buddhism out there. There are a number of divisions or types of Buddhism out there. There's Theravada, there's Mahayana, there's Zen, there's Pure Land, there's Tibetan Buddhism. There's all sorts of divisions within Buddhism because it's an ancient religion. So there's different schools of thought that exist. Remember, Buddha was just a man, and he actually did not even write down his own teachings when he lived. It is his disciples that took down his teachings, his ideals, and they wrote them down. And so Buddhists do have some texts, but they're not exactly the same as the Bible. And nobody really claims that they're divine, and nobody claims that they're the word of God, because there isn't a God, So they're just wise teachings of a person who understood reality to be something other than what he's experienced. And because he came through that maze, he wants to lead other people through that same maze of life and help them to get to the same place where he got. Okay. Basically, Buddhism is a type of a religion, or you can even call philosophy, because it doesn't believe in a deity. It's all about life. It's all about life here now, and embracing reality of life rather than living in a state of not reality, or being asleep, or being confused. Let's put it that way. So in Buddhism, every person can attain that state of enlightenment. The potential to seek their own path is laid with everyone. There is no guide. There's no clergy. There's no person, no priest or anybody leading you to that truth. There's no secrets. Just everyone can discover it in their own ways. And there are different paths that can lead you to that truth. But nobody is a one singular guide. Nobody holds the truth that you must attain. It's out there readily available. It's just, how difficult. The question is, how difficult is it going to be for you to find that truth? There are some paths towards that truth that are easy, that make it easier to get there, basically. And that's what, Buddhism is about. So the basic tenets of Buddhism, what Buddha taught is that a man can change and transform himself. Wherever you find yourself, whoever you are, if you are not having a proper perception of reality, you can change yourself. Okay. And human being is also burdened by the weight of his tendencies and circumstances, and that can prevent him from reaching freedom. But the freedom is available to everyone. And remember, because Buddhism is built on the foundation of Hinduism, it actually shares a lot of the ideology and the thinking of Hinduism. So the idea about like dharma and karma, the idea about reincarnation and things like that, these are all sort of, say, foundational to Buddhism. They're underneath the surface. Although Buddhism does not even focus on some of those things, there's still something from which Prince Siddhartha operated on. They're the presuppositions of life. He already accepted those things as the foundation, and then he simply built upon them. So knowing Hinduism actually helps you to understand Buddhism. And if you don't know Hinduism, Buddhism will become even more confusing to you. So you kind of have to have one before the other because it's built on a foundation. All right. So the idea is that you can escape, sort of say, this life or the series of lives if you look at Hinduism, and you can only escape that through enlightenment. So what Hindus call nirvana, Buddhists call enlightenment, right? Becoming a Buddha. It's that same moment of transforming yourself into something else. Okay. So there's several things that Buddha taught and understood that are foundational to his philosophy. And some of these actually have to do with his life experiences. But those truths and those ideas is what helped him to become enlightened, which is why they became the part of his teaching. Okay. And I'm talking right now about the Four Noble Truths, okay, on page 147. The first truth, or the foundational truth that Buddha taught, is that life is suffering. Life is suffering. All life is suffering, and there is no life without suffering. That's basically the content of life. Embrace it, understand it, accept it, and do not fight it. It is what it is, okay? There is no life without suffering. Suffering is the fundamental, basic fact, okay? And just move along, basically. And so the point of understanding that life is suffering is not that you encourage just, all right, I'll just sit here and do nothing then, The point is to have a realistic expectation of life. If life is suffering, then stop fighting this and just accept it and embrace it and be realistic about it. And now ask yourself, how can I minimize it, right? Or how can I deal with my problem in life, which is suffering itself? So that brings us to the second noble truth, which concerns the roots of suffering. All right. And the root of suffering is self-desire or craving. We crave something. We want something. We want to attain something. Is it greed or envy or whatever? Some sort of a want of desire or pleasure is what causes more suffering. The reason why we have suffering is because we want things. If we didn't want things, we wouldn't suffer. Okay, and that's kind of a circular thinking. And the reason why we suffer is because we want those things and we can't have those things. So we are continuing to experience the lack of those things, and that makes our life miserable, and so on and so forth. So the cause or the root is not the suffering itself, it's the desire. So if I can somehow deal with my desire, then I will address the root problem. So that brings us to the third noble truth, which is the extension of the first two truths, and asserts that because suffering has a cause, it can be eliminated, meaning you can fight the desire. You can fight that craving, okay? And thus, you can eliminate suffering. So life is suffering, recognize it, and then there's a root to suffering, and that root can be dealt with and eliminated. Which brings you to the fourth truth, which is sometimes called the remedy, and that is the prescription of how do you get to nirvana. The prescription is nirvana. The prescription is coming out of the cycle of suffering. You suffer, suffer, suffer. You suffer because you want things and you keep desiring things. But when you realize that what you're engaging in is pointless, you are embarking now on the path of overcoming that pointless journey and towards purpose. And that's nirvana. And when you achieve nirvana, that is when you are truly liberated and free from suffering. You don't have it anymore. You don't have desire. You don't have suffering. Everything is fine. Everything is good. I know. Sounds very simple, and when you put it that way, but actually it's quite complicated. So this is sort of a very basic, quick explanation of the core of the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. And so you don't just get there by simply saying, okay, I'm done suffering now. Okay, I'm free. That's not how it gets there. There's actually a long life path that people live to try to get them there. And Buddhism describes this as the Eightfold Path. Okay, so the Four Noble Truths are the principles. And out of those principles comes out the practical way of achieving that redemption, achieving the enlightenment, achieving the nirvana. Okay, so and that's the whole point, is moving away from unhappiness, moving away from suffering, moving into a better direction. And so will you achieve it or not? That's a big question, but at least you can move away or move in the right direction to begin with. So that's the idea. So on page 148, we have the 8 things that a Buddhist is directed to do to bring them into that better direction, moving away from suffering and towards redemption. Okay, so you have the right view of achieving a correct understanding and accepting the reality and origins of suffering and the ways leading to cessation of suffering. So the right view is basically understand the reality. If you are smart enough to understand that you are living this life of suffering and you are able to rationalize it and understand it, then you are already moving down the path of wisdom. You can change things because now you understand things. Of course, when you don't understand things, you can't change anything because you don't even know what's going on. And then, of course, the second part, if after the right view, is the right purpose. Okay, why do you want to, move towards nirvana? The purpose of being is free from ill will, cruelty, and untruthfulness towards the self and others. The purpose of you achieving nirvana is not just you. The purpose is harmony with everyone else. Okay, you are moving in this direction so that you can free yourself from evil and bad things and cruelty, so you can basically become a better person. So the right view is just awareness, and right purpose is an intentionality. And the intentionality has to be right in order for you to proceed down a path, because if your intentionality is wrong, you're not going to be able to follow this path. So the idea is to minimize suffering and hatred for other people as well, so to minimize evil, and that is the right direction, so to say, according to Buddha. Now, the third path is right speech. Okay, and that's, of course, you're supposed to speak what is true. You're supposed to be honest. You're supposed to consider what you say to other people. Don't just speak and then think later. Think first, then speak. Don't say things that are wrong or deliberately misleading or harmful or painful. So right speech leads you towards that path. And then, of course, right action, and that is acting in a proper way, being moral, being a peacemaker, being an honorable person, and which goes along with a right livelihood, which is basically means not harming people or animals or even plants around you, living in harmony with the world that you're in. So right speech, right action, right life, essentially. Those are the things of how you interact with the world. So one has to do with wisdom, understanding things. The other one has to do with practical conduct and how you behave in the world. And the third aspect of the Eightfold Path, the 6, 7, and 8, has to do more with your mind. It has to do with your mental state of things. Right efforts is what Buddha taught, and that is maintaining good, positive, and wholesome thoughts instead of dwelling on negativity and anger, because all of that will cause suffering. You become mindful of your thinking and you focus on positive things. Okay, you concentrate on good things, and that allows you to have the right disposition, right mental disposition, so right efforts. Then it says the second was right mindfulness, which basically is you being able to manage your mind, saying that I can control what I think about, I control what I engage in my mind. Because while some people may think that what you think doesn't matter, what you do matters, to Buddha, what you think matters because it will determine what you do, essentially. So you kind of get the idea. This is the mental aspect of moving in the right direction. And then the eighth one is the right concentration, which basically says, to consider to have a calm, meditative, stated, settled mind where you are able to achieve a purity of thought and concentrate and focus because you are not distracted by other things. So these are the eight things, or the eightfold path that Buddha has taught, that leads to enlightenment, that leads to an ability of embrace reality for what it is versus us not really understanding what life is all about and going through it and suffering pointlessly and mindlessly, and not even realizing how the life is supposed to be or how it's supposed to end or anything like that. So pretty interesting philosophy, right? And let's be real. This is philosophy. There's no God here, anywhere here at all. There's no worship here at all. It's all about human beings and relationships with other people and relationship within yourself. That's what it's about. It's about you, and it's about others. But God is not even playing in anywhere here at all. Not in any of these systems that we're talking about. So hopefully it makes sense to you guys that this is a little bit different of religion. It's not focused on a deity at all, which is why a lot of people don't even think of Buddhism as a religion. A lot of people tend to think of it as more of a philosophy of life, without deity. Okay. Does that make sense? Anybody that has any big questions on Buddhism or anything like that? I'm definitely even less of a expert in Buddhism. At least in the Western religions, I have serious expertise. In the Eastern religions, I have less and less expertise because those are the languages I don't know, cultures that I studied less, and things like that. But if I can explain something to you, just because I have studied these things, I'd be happy to. I can address your common misunderstandings, perhaps, on some of these areas. And maybe you have something to contribute. Maybe you think the book is full of it, and you do understand Eastern religion much better than the book. So I don't know. You'll help me out then. Anybody? Any thoughts? All right. Okay, everyone's being quiet. All right, that's fine. That's okay. Don't worry about it. That's all right. These are difficult things to talk about, when most of us are learning and trying to understand it. All right, so let's talk about on page 149, a little further on, the cultural expressions of Buddhism. You probably have noticed people from Asian culture, which, of course, many of them are Buddhists, or even if they're not Buddhists, they're still part of a culture that is largely Buddhist in its custom and behavior and outlook. Might behave in a very interesting way. For example, they are often silent. Okay? It is a feature of an Asian culture to be silent, to revere silence. Okay? To believe that silence is important, to practice silence. Okay? So just because a person is silent doesn't mean they don't have anything to say. They're choosing to be silent. And it is a disposition based on the philosophical tenets of having right speech, for example. Right speech. If I don't say it right, that maybe it's not worth saying. So I'm going to, rather than say it wrong, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to hold back my speech. See, that makes sense. To a Westerner, that's really hard to embrace. That a person is choosing not to speak because they don't feel like they have the right words. Or maybe those words are not helpful, and so they're choosing not to speak. And to a Westerner, that's a crazy idea, because Westerners, that's all they do is talk, 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 talk. Okay. I mean, it's just so much of a different worldview to say, I'm not going to speak, I'm not going to say anything on this matter. So silence is sometimes the best answer, right? And that is exactly what a lot of people in Asian world practice. They practice silence. It's a big virtue. Just like there's a virtue to speak in the West, there's a virtue not to speak in the East. And so silence is connected to meditation. Silence is connected to focus. Silence is connected to turning inward and finding answers within yourself rather than trying to find answers in the external world. So silence is a big cultural value and a, predominant cultural practice. And therefore, when you see people who don't say much, it's partially because of these cultural values that they're embracing, and they're simply acting out what they know, how they are, what their culture has taught them to be like. And so that is certainly, a norm. You could see how this will affect intercultural communication, right? Because you can't really communicate with people who don't talk back to you, right? That's the problem. Communication is predicated on person speaking. And if you're not speaking, well, you are communicating, but you're much harder to understand. I mean, I can communicate without speaking. You know that? You can communicate without speaking. In fact, you don't have to say a word to communicate. I've had entire conversations with people without saying a word. You just have to be intuitive enough to understand what the frame of mind is, and you allow the context and the setting to speak for itself. There's ways to do that. To a Westerner, that's really hard to embrace, but to an Easterner, that's normal. All right, so silence is one of the aspects. Certainly affects your communicative behavior. Impermanency is another feature that the authors highlight. So impermanency has to do with the fact that nothing is set, nothing is permanent, everything is changing. All things are, well, they don't matter because they go away. Everything is gone. And that's a really, it's again a cultural value that people embrace. Nothing is the same, nothing is consistent, everything will pass away. And what it does, it underlines to people the temporary nature of life. And if the life is temporary, the life is fleeting, if the life is impermanent, then you should take the life that you have right now and do something about it, i.e., set yourself on a path of enlightenment. Set yourself on a path of moving in the right direction. Because if life is just fleeting and here it is and there it is gone, then, doing nothing about it is really wasting it. So you should do something about it. It's just what it is that you're going to do is the question. So there are, of course, worthwhile things and not worthwhile things. And that is at the core of Buddhist, thinking. Now, of course, there is like I said, because of the building, Buddhism is built on Hinduism, there's the concept of karma. It's still there. And so Buddhists do believe in similar idea. And I think Buddhist karma is a little bit different from Hindu karma, but it's close in meaning. I struggle to explain the subtle differences between them. But I think there is a difference in how karma is understood. Okay, so I think in Hinduism, karma is more of almost like a destiny, and I think in Buddhism, it's a little bit more. You're a little bit more involved in karma. Let's put it that way. I think that would be the biggest difference that I would see, that I could easily articulate in my mind. But so that's the idea. All right. So they do have the concept of karma just like the Hindus do. The ethics, Buddhist ethics, of course, you understand. There's, there's no God, there's no commandments. So where's the ethics? The ethics are going to be very general. The ethics are going to be very broad. They're just kind of human standards of behavior, what society judges to be good versus what society judges to be bad. Being kind, being compassionate, being generous, social customs are important in the Buddhist life, but it's not the same as commandments in the Bible, or directions in Quran. It's definitely not even close to that, because you don't have the absolute truth. You don't have the words of God. You don't have judgment. None of those things are there, and therefore the aspect of ethics now changes. It's really relative, sort of say, okay? So there are some specific precepts that Buddhism, of course, embraces, and one of them that is important to understand is the killing of living beings, okay? That is something that people have to understand. Killing things that are alive. Why is that important? Because if you believe in reincarnation, all living beings are really part of the reality, part of God. And so, again, that is the leftover from Hinduism. Hinduism believes that all life is God. Brahman is in all things. Therefore, it would make sense that you would, forego, which is why a lot of Hindus are vegetarians, by the way. Okay? They don't eat living things. Or if they eat living things, it is like the plants only. But eating animal is eating life, and eating life is like, that could be your cousin, out there, because he got reincarnated into a lower form or something like that. And so I know it sounds crazy when I say it like that, and maybe disrespectful too, but I understand why people would not want to eat something living, because if they believe in reincarnation of various forms, then it makes total sense. So some people would only eat vegetables, which is, of course, the lowest, fruits, vegetables, plant life, which is, of course, the lowest form of those things. But, that's the philosophy. So Buddhism embraces some of the same ideas at times. Killing living beings, and, drinking is forbidden. Intoxication. Why? Because when you become intoxicated, you can't think straight, and you end up behaving crazy and hurting people. And if the idea in Buddhism is harmony, then you certainly do not want to break that harmony, okay? So what do Buddhists believe about death? What are some of their notions about death? Well, Buddha does talk a lot about death. In fact, death is embraced. Karma is important. Death is important. Impermanence is important. These are all aspects of Buddhist thought that are kind of foundational. So death is not feared, of course. It's just the natural passing into another stage of life. There's no fear. There's no judgment. There's no deity out there on the other side looking for you. So death is something that's understood as certain. This is what I'm going to read this. This is really good right here in the book on page 151. It says, Buddha's message was clear and simple. Death is certain. Time of death is uncertain. And what can you help is the actual moment of death is your spiritual development. So you don't know when you're going to die, so you live every moment as if you're going to die any moment. But you do know what you're going to die for sure. So you orient yourself about now. It's all about living in the now, in the moment. Not very futuristically oriented life, but that is certainly, cohesive with the Buddhist philosophy. So Buddhists see death as ending of one chapter and starting of another, because of how they see karma, the past deeds, your morality, your immorality, what you've done, how you lived your life, how you oriented yourself, will allow you to move further or to hang back. And so only once there's enough of good karma, you will experience nirvana. So you kind of get the idea. A lot of the Buddhist ideas about karma and afterlife and death are very closely tied to Hinduism. The only difference is that Hinduism is a bit more deistic. There is a concept or an idea of a deity in Hinduism, or actually multiple deities, and deities in all things, where in Buddhism, that is not the concern. The concern is right life, not clear understanding of the right deity or something like that. Buddhists do not avoid death. They embrace death. In some cultures, people do avoid death. Buddhists do not. And so people do not believe in clinging to life. They embrace it. The good death is very important. What's important is to be focused on good things, positive things when a person dies, because according to Buddha, that moves them further towards nirvana. So kind of having that positive disposition. So harmony in all things. Again, an interesting tradition. You could see how something like that, a person who embraces this worldview, would certainly communicate in a very unique ways. All right, so just quick, any questions before I move into Confucianism and then tie the chapter together? I'm going to do a quick review of Confucianism, all right? Confucianism is, of course, related. Confucianism is another worldview. Unlike religion, I would not even call Confucianism a religion. I mean, I don't know. Some people might not. But Confucianism is definitely a worldview, and it is a political ideology and a social tradition, and it is a way of life. But again, there is no divine in Confucianism. There's no deity. There's no worship of deity. In fact, there's no Bible, there are no commandments, none of those things. So Confucianism is more of a philosophy of a way of life and maintaining tradition and social order. The emphasis is on values such as concern for the future, hard work, achievement, education, merit, frugality, and cooperation. So Confucianism is a way of life for sure, and a philosophy for sure, but it is not a religious devotion with a deity and commandments and judgment and afterlife and things like that. In fact, Confucianism does not care about any of those things at all. Okay? No formal religious hierarchy, no formal religious thought. Confucianism is just precepts of the way to live life. That's how one can describe Confucianism. Confucianism was started by a man named Confucius who lived in 5th century China. That would be BCE, okay? So he definitely predates, Judaism and Christianity. Again, if you noticed, a lot of these, older sort of say ideas are definitely predating the Western religions. Confucius was just a man, just a teacher, an educator who wanted to create a better society built on character, and he believed that anybody could achieve it. So he started teaching ideas and thoughts and right way of life, and it kind of caught on, and he created this entire philosophy of life, and that's basically Confucianism. Okay, he's not a religious dignitary of any sort. There is no afterlife. There's no world to come. There's no judgment, no deities. It's just that people should live good life, and they learn how to behave proper, and that contributes to a good, structured, well-organized society. Your learning, your education is important. Why? Because if you become educated, you're a better member of a society. You can contribute to yourself and to others better if you're educated. A social order is important. Confucius believed in social order. He believed in hierarchy. Eastern societies tend to be hierarchical, where there are upper classes and middle classes and lower classes. There are tiers and tiers and tiers of hierarchies, where you have a ruler and a subject, a husband and a wife, a brother and a younger brother, a friend and a junior friend, and so on and so forth. They're very hierarchical structure. Which is, typical of many Asian societies, where your status is measured in some way, meaningful way. Of course, for a lot of Westerners, that's strange, but that is a society that is run based on prestige and status and achievement. And so Confucius was very much about that, and he believed in maintaining that and acting within the proper confines and borders of those structures. Do not transgress your hierarchy structures, basically, is what he was teaching people. Confucius's writings are collected into a collection by his disciples the collection, the most important one is called the Analects, and so still being read and studied today. So again, it's not a religious writing, just more along the line of philosophy and ethics and right way of life. And so when we go into how that is being expressed in life, actually, there are several important concepts of Confucianism, and they are Zhen, Li, Te, and Wen. So humanism, the belief in human people and relationship with other humans as individuals is important, and interrelationships between each other. And so that's one of the teachings of Confucius that he sort of say one of the areas of life that he focused on. Okay, that regardless of your status or where you fit in the order of things, you could still live in harmony with other people who are in different places in life. So that's just being a good human. Okay. Li is rituals and rites, and that's about showing proper manners and expressing your respect and giving dignity to people and so on and so forth. So whatever the conventions of the society are, you have to act in a proper way. And he taught about that. Then he taught about power, which is te, and that means governing people and having responsibility of leadership, and leaders leading in the right way and not abusing their responsibility of leadership. And then when is the arts, it's the music, it's the painting, it's the poetry, it's anything. So there's a human expression, which is beautiful as far as the art goes, whether we talk about calligraphy or music. He taught about the importance of human interaction with the arts because they make us better and they elevate us and they give us an opportunity for self-expression. So those are important sort of say areas that Confucius focused on. So again, Confucianism and Buddhism are always, often are interrelated. Why? Because they actually coexist in the Asian world simultaneously. There's no conflict between Buddhism and Confucianism per se. They're complementary because either system is actually quite broad. Okay. So what's important to understand is that Confucianism teaches empathy, meaning consideration and understanding for other people. You don't just talk to people, you consider who they are. You don't just launch into a dialogue or discussion without being mindful, okay? Then the other one is the status role, approaching the person the right way, giving person the right honor. Are you speaking to an elder or not, is the question. So again, that is the core of Confucius philosophy. And the following the protocol, following the ritual, doing the right thing in the right way. There's like an order of things to do. There's the right way to approach and there's not the right way to approach, okay? And also the correct use of language is another feature that's relevant in Confucianism to communication, of course, because if you don't use right language, then you will offend people and you will cause disharmony. Okay, so you could see how some of the tenets of Confucius' teachings are actually overlapping pretty good with Buddhism. But remember, it's again a religious teaching, no deity, no sort of say ideas like that. So as far as Confucius and notions of afterlife and death, well, Confucius didn't really care about it because it's not about religion. It's not about afterlife. It's about now. It's about living a good life right now, right here. So it's all speculative. It doesn't really matter. So a lot of people today in the ancient world will combine Confucianism, Buddhism, and the ancestral religions with which they grew up with, which could be all sorts of shamanism and magic and spiritism and things like that. And none of those things are actually conflicting with each other because each one of those systems are broad enough to combine. So it's very interesting. It's not that Buddhists and people who follow Confucianism do not have the religious aspect of their life as the Western people think about religion as far as deities and spirit world and supernatural and things like that. They do. It just doesn't come from Buddhism and Confucianism. It comes from their ancestral worship that they have had for generations and generations. And that is highly tied to the locale, to the area where people live and the family they come from and things like that. So that's the general idea. Now, just to close out the chapter, the authors talk about developing religious tolerance. And this is really important. We have just studied all these different religions, and it's not it's always kind of, the temptation is to kind of compare everybody and contrast everyone and start making value judgments and things like that. This is better, this is worth. And the idea is this is different. All religions are different. They all have their own cohesive systems that they propose to understand the world. These are worldviews. Sometimes they're competing worldviews, but it doesn't make one of them better or worse. They are what they are. Whether there's a deity in the center of it or not, whether that particular philosophy of life answers the life questions that you trying to answer or not, is besides the point. Recognize what these religions are for what they are, accept them for what they are, and accept that the people that you will meet in life will embrace those ways of looking at the world as the legitimate ways. Just like you embrace your way as the legitimate way, they will embrace it. And if you can figure out which way it is that they embrace as the legitimate way of making sense of this world, then your communication will be better, because you will know where they come from. You will understand them, your conversational partner, better, and probably will have less misunderstanding and less conflict. So that's the whole point of studying religions, is to realize what they are, learn from them, and be tolerant, and not make crazy statements and offend people because you're not being sensitive that they do not believe the way you believe. They don't feel about the same topics the same way you feel. In the end, if you're going to have conversation with people and you have communication, then you want to have an effective communication. Well, the best and the easiest way to have an ineffective communication is to ignore people, dismiss them, minimize them, and basically offend them in every way possible by assuming that they're just like you and they see the world the same way. But intercultural communication, we take the opposite approach, where we assume people are not like us, and we have a responsibility of showing kindness and tolerance to people who are not like us, even if we don't agree or embrace, their differences, so to say. We still have to, be kind, essentially, because that's the only way we're going to communicate. So there's several good suggestions in this chapter, at the end about tolerance. I'm just going to highlight just a couple of them. Recognize these things, study them, learn them so that you can make them a part of your understanding of the world. You realize this, a worldview, any one of these worldviews that you embrace is only one worldview. But what if your worldview includes the worldviews of other people? Think of how much more of a multifaceted person you become when you encompass other worldviews within your worldview. They don't have to make sense. They don't have to harmonize. They don't have to work out perfectly. But in the end, you could still have a broader perspective, a better understanding of the world, because you have taken the time to study how other people see themselves and see their world around them. Okay. Studying other people's religions and how to better communicate with them will essentially have a positive effect on your behavior as you communicate with others, because it will make you more aware, more sensitive to other people in the process of communication. Most of our miscommunication happens because we're not sensitive to somebody else. We are focused too much on ourselves and too little on somebody else. And so if we change that, we increase our chances of success. Let's put it that way. Because the worst communication is the unsuccessful communication, right? That's we communicate because we want something. We want to achieve something. When we fail at that, then our communication fails. It's unsuccessful. Then what's the point? That's when we stop talking and start swinging fists, right? So that's when we start fighting. All right, so that was an interesting chapter on worldviews, and specifically on worldviews about life and death. So I do have an exercise for you guys coming up that talks about you looking at your own worldview of life and death and kind of describing it to me. So please browse those notes that I've left for you and submit them for you. I would love to see that. It's subjective. I just want you to formulate these things for yourself. And I would appreciate that. So moving forward, we will move into the cultural history. Besides studying other people's cultures and religions, knowing their history and what they have been through also helps us to understand another facets of their personality. Knowing what certain people groups have gone through as a part of their long journey as a people helps us to empathize with them and to be more sensitive towards them as well. So we're going to move into the history section in the next week. All right, that's where we are. So that pretty much concludes our class. If you guys have any questions, please open up your microphone, let me know. And if not, then I understand. This has been definitely a very let's say complicated class, and I had to talk a lot. So I'm a little tired of talking. All right. So I don't see any questions. Anybody? Addison, you have a comment? Go ahead.
It's not a question, just was